I never thought I would become the disposable one in my own family. Growing up, I believed loyalty was something that ran in our blood. That family stood together no matter what. That belief didn't die quickly. It was chipped away slowly, conversation by conversation, gathering by gathering, until one day I looked around and realized I was standing completely alone. My cousin Ryan and I were born just 6 months apart. Our parents used to joke that we were more like brothers than cousins. We grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, celebrated holidays together, and spent countless summers sleeping on each other's floors. But while our childhoods looked similar on the surface, our lives took very different paths. Ryan's father was always business-minded. He took risks, invested early, and by the time Ryan was in college, his family was already well off. Mine wasn't poor, but we were careful. My father worked long hours at a modest job. My mother stretched every dollar. And success was something we believed came slowly, through patience and effort. When we were younger, the differences didn't matter. But as we got older, money became a language my family started listening to more closely. After college, Ryan joined his father's company. Within a few years, he was driving expensive cars, posting vacation photos from places I had only ever seen on screens, and casually talking about investments and profits at family dinners. I, on the other hand, took a safer route. I worked a stable job, paid my bills on time, and tried to build something of my own. I wasn't flashy, but I was proud of the life I was slowly creating. At first, the comments were subtle. "Ryan really knows how to play the game," my uncle would say, glancing at me as if I should take notes. "You should talk to your cousin about opportunities," my mother suggested once, not unkindly, but with a tone that implied I was behind. Then came the comparisons. Ryan already bought a house. Ryan, here's traveling again. Ryan helped his parents renovate their place. I smiled through all of it. I told myself they were just proud. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was wrong. Things shifted after my grandmother fell ill. She was the heart of our family, the one who hosted every holiday, remembered every birthday, and made us feel like we belonged somewhere. When she got sick, everyone gathered more often, and that's when I noticed it. Clearly, decisions were no longer discussed as a family. They were decided around Ryan: what hospital to choose, which doctor to consult, how to manage finances. Ryan's opinion suddenly carried weight, not because he was wiser or more caring, but because he could pay without flinching. I offered my help. I offered my time. I rearranged my work schedule to be there. But it was Ryan who was praised. Thank God Ryan is successful. We're lucky to have him. We don't have to worry because Ryan can handle it. Each sentence landed like a quiet accusation, as if my presence was appreciated, but my value was limited. The breaking point came during a family meeting about my grandmother's care. We sat around the dining table I had grown up eating at. I suggested a plan that balanced quality care with financial sustainability. I had done research. I had numbers. I spoke calmly. Ryan interrupted me halfway through. "That's not realistic," he said casually. "We should just do what's best, regardless of cost." Everyone nodded. No one asked me to finish. That was the moment I realized my voice had become optional. After my grandmother passed, the family didn't come together. Instead, they reorganized themselves around Ryan. Holidays were hosted at his place. Family group chats revolved around his schedule. Plans were made without consulting me, then shared as an afterthought. I was still invited technically, but I felt like a guest, not family. Then came the real betrayal. My parents had always promised that one day they would help me with a down payment on a small house. Nothing extravagant, just enough to give me a start. I never demanded it. I never rushed them. It was just something we talked about, something that gave me hope. One evening, my mother sat me down. "We've been thinking," she said carefully. "Ryan is expanding his business, and there's an opportunity for the family to be part of something bigger." I listened, confused. "We're going to invest the money," my father added. "It makes more sense long-term." The money they had saved for years. The money they promised me, gone, redirected without discussion. I asked a simple question. "What about me?" They exchanged a look. "You'll understand someday," my mother said. "Ryan's success benefits all of us. That sentence changed everything. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just nodded and left. Over the next year, I pulled away. Not dramatically. I stopped initiating calls. I declined invitations politely. I focused on my work, my health, my future. I told myself that if my family measured worth in wealth, I would stop competing entirely. And something unexpected happened. Without the constant comparison, I found clarity. I started a side project I had been afraid to pursue. I worked nights, weekends, sacrificed comfort for possibility. Slowly, painfully, it began to grow. I didn't tell my family. Why would I? Ryan's business, meanwhile, became the center of everything. Family gatherings turned into networking events. Conversations felt transactional. Love had conditions now. Then one night, my phone rang. It was my mother. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice sounded different, unsteady. I didn't know it then, but that call marked the beginning of the reversal. The moment when the family that chose my rich cousin over me realized what they had lost. When my mother asked to talk, I almost said no. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. Emotional distance had become a form of self-preservation, and reopening that door felt dangerous. Still, some part of me hoped, stupidly, that maybe this time the conversation would be different. We met at my parents' house, the same living room where I had grown up, where family photos still hung on the walls. Frozen moments of a time when belonging felt unconditional. My father sat quietly, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother spoke first. "Ryan's business is struggling," she said. The words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I waited for more. "There were risks we didn't know about," she continued. "Investments went wrong. Partnerships fell through." I nodded slowly, not out of satisfaction but recognition. So I had seen this pattern before. Success praised loudly, risk ignored quietly. "They need help," my father finally said. I looked at him then. Really looked. His shoulders were slumped in a way I had never seen before. This wasn't pride speaking. It was fear. "And you called me because?" I asked. My mother hesitated. "You're smart. Careful, you always were. Maybe you could talk to Ryan. Help him reorganize things." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. For years, my opinions had been dismissed. My caution labeled as lack of ambition. My steady path treated like failure. And now suddenly I was useful again. "I don't know his business," I said calmly. "But you understand planning," she insisted. "You understand patience." There it was. The very qualities that once made me invisible now made me valuable. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I asked a question that had been sitting in my chest for a long time. Why didn't any of this matter before? Silence. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We thought success looked a certain way. I left shortly after. No promises made. Ryan reached out a few days later. The message was short, awkward, stripped of the confidence that once defined him. "Hey, heard you've been doing well. Thought maybe we could talk." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. We met at a quiet cafe. Gone was the expensive watch, the easy smile. He looked tired, older, vulnerable in a way I had never seen. "I messed up," he admitted quickly. I expanded too fast. "Trusted the wrong people." I listened. I always had been good at that. "I need help," he said finally. "The family thinks you might have some ideas, not an apology." "Not really, just need." "I can look at things," I said, "but I won't fix it for you." That surprised him. Over the next few weeks, I reviewed documents, numbers, timelines. I pointed out where ego had replaced strategy, where shortcuts had replaced structure. He listened reluctantly at first, then with growing respect. But something else was happening in the background. My own project, the one I had built quietly, carefully, was taking off. Clients came in through word of mouth. Revenue stabilized. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving. I was secure. My family noticed. Suddenly I was invited again, asked for opinions, complimented for my discipline and vision, words that had never been used for me before. "You've really grown," my uncle said one evening. I smiled politely. Inside, something hardened, because growth didn't come from their support. It came from their absence. Ryan's situation improved slowly, but the damage was done. The family's financial cushion was thinner, Anxiety replaced admiration, and with that shift came a new tone. They spoke to me differently now, softer, more careful. One night, my mother admitted what I had always suspected. "We were wrong," she said. "We made you feel less." I wanted that sentence years ago, when it might have mattered. "I don't want to be chosen because someone else failed," I said quietly. "I wanted to be chosen because I belonged." She cried. I didn't. The truth was, I had already moved on in ways they couldn't see. I no longer needed their approval to feel whole. I no longer needed to prove my worth. And that scared them, because for the first time the power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer chasing acceptance, they were. Ryan thanked me eventually, awkwardly, sincerely maybe. But even that couldn't undo the years of imbalance. They began inviting me to lead discussions, to help plan, to advise. Roles I had once tried to earn were now being handed to me freely. But something had changed inside me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt detached. They wanted me back not as family, but as stability, as reassurance, as a safety net. And I had to decide whether love once made conditional could ever feel unconditional again. That decision would define the rest of my life. As my role in the family quietly shifted, I began to notice how quickly people adjust when the balance of power changes. Conversations that once talked over me now paused for my input. Decisions were no longer finalized before I arrived. I wasn't louder or more assertive than before. The only difference was that now they believed I mattered. And that realization hurt more than being ignored ever did. Ryan tried to rebuild not just his business, but his image. He spoke less and listened more. He stopped dominating conversations and started asking questions. On the surface, it looked like growth. But I had learned the hard way that humility born from loss feels different than humility chosen freely. The family began depending on me in subtle ways. My phone rang more often. Questions about finances, planning, even personal decisions were suddenly directed at me. It was as if they were rewriting history, pretending I had always been the steady one, the responsible one. What they didn't realize was that I was already building a life outside of them. The project I started in silence became a company in structure, if not in name. I hired my first contractor, signed longer-term clients, created systems that didn't rely solely on me. For the first time, I experienced something rare, freedom without permission. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I let results speak quietly. That quiet terrified my family. One evening, during a family dinner, my aunt asked a question that revealed everything. "So how successful are you now?" Not "are you happy?" Not "how are you doing?" Just success, measured in numbers. I answered honestly but vaguely, enough to confirm stability, not enough to invite entitlement. The table went silent. My mother smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My father cleared his throat. Ryan looked down. They were recalculating, reassigning value, and in that moment, I understood something deeply unsettling. They hadn't chosen Ryan because he was rich. They had chosen him because they believed wealth was certainty, and now that certainty had cracked, they were reaching for the next strongest pillar, me. A few weeks later, my parents asked me to come over again. This time the tone was different, formal, careful. "We've been thinking about the future," my father said. "They wanted to revise plans. Estate plans, responsibilities, roles. We want you more involved," my mother added quickly. "You've shown you can be trusted." Trusted? As if that had ever been the question. They spoke about fairness, balance, family unity. Words polished by regret. I listened quietly, then asked one question. If Ryan had never failed, would we be having this conversation? No one answered. That silence was my answer. I realized then that returning fully to this family meant accepting a version of love that adapted based on usefulness. And I had already outgrown that need. I didn't cut them off. I didn't make dramatic declarations. I simply redefined boundaries. I helped where I chose to. I declined where I needed to. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped justifying my distance, and slowly they felt it. They sensed that I was no longer available in the way they wanted, that my presence was no longer guaranteed, that my help was no longer automatic. They wanted me back the way they remembered me, quiet, reliable, forgiving. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. Ryan tried to reconnect one-on-one. We talked more honestly than we ever had. He admitted he had enjoyed the attention, the admiration, the unspoken hierarchy. I didn't see it then, he said. How much it cost you. I believed him, and yet belief didn't undo damage. Time passed. The family stabilized, not because they fixed their values, but because they learned to survive discomfort. And I thrived, not because I became richer than Ryan, but because I stopped measuring my worth against anyone else. The final shift came quietly. One holiday I chose not to attend. No excuse, just honesty. I'm spending it elsewhere. My mother's voice trembled on the phone. We'll miss you. I believe that too, but missing someone isn't the same as choosing them. They wanted me back because I represented security in uncertainty, because I had become dependable when everything else felt fragile. But I didn't need to return to feel complete. I had built something stronger than approval. I had built peace, and that, more than money, was the thing they could never take from me again. Distance changes perspective in ways closeness never can. Once I stopped orbiting my family's expectations, I began to see patterns that had always been there, but were easier to ignore when I was desperate to belong. Their love had never been cruel, just conditional. And conditional love has a way of shaping people into quieter, smaller versions of themselves. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires attachment. What I felt instead was clarity. Ryan's recovery continued, but it never returned to what it once was. The fast growth, the admiration, the sense of invincibility, all gone. He was steadier now, more cautious, more grounded. Ironically, he had become closer to the person I had always been, the person my family once overlooked. We spoke occasionally, not out of obligation, but mutual understanding. There was no rivalry left, only a shared awareness of how quickly roles can change when money enters the room. My parents struggled the most with the new reality. They tried to be supportive without being intrusive, loving without demanding. Sometimes they succeeded. Sometimes old habits slipped through. My mother would still ask questions disguised as concern. My father would still measure progress in tangible outcomes, but I no longer internalized it. Their words no longer defined me. One afternoon, my mother admitted something she had never said out loud before. When you pulled away, I was afraid, she said, not because of the family falling apart, but because I realized we might have lost you for good. That fear was real, and for the first time it wasn't tied to money or stability. It was tied to connection. I didn't leave to punish anyone, I told her. I left to survive. She nodded. No defense, no justification. That moment mattered. Not because it fixed everything, but because it acknowledged the truth without rewriting it. As my life continued to grow, professionally, emotionally, quietly, I noticed something else. People outside my family valued me without needing proof. Friends respected my boundaries. Colleagues trusted my judgment. Clients appreciated consistency more than charisma. It reinforced a lesson I had learned too late, but deeply. Belonging should not require performance. The family still invited me, still asked, still hoped. But the urgency was gone. They had accepted, at least partially, that I would not return to the old dynamic. And strangely, that acceptance brought a different kind of peace. On one visit, my father pulled me aside. "We're proud of you," he said. "Not because you're successful, not because you're stable, just proud." It was late, but it wasn't meaningless. I realized then that forgiveness doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes it looks like releasing the need for things to be different. They had chosen my rich cousin over me once, not out of malice but fear. Fear of insecurity, fear of uncertainty, fear of backing the wrong future. Now they wanted me back, not as a replacement but as reassurance. And I didn't hate them for it, but I also didn't return in the way they expected. I showed up as myself, independent, whole, unavailable for comparison. The version of me they lost was gone forever. The version they gained was stronger, but no longer dependent on their approval. And that was the quiet consequence of their choice. Not punishment, not revenge, just distance that taught everyone the truth. Sometimes family doesn't choose you until they realize you no longer need to be chosen. There is a strange moment that comes after healing, one that people don't talk about enough. It's the moment when you realize the wound no longer hurts, but the scar has changed the way you move through the world. That's where I found myself. My family never stopped loving me. But they learned too late that love without presence feels hollow. They tried to rebuild what had been lost. But some things can't be restored to their original shape. They can only become something new. I stopped waiting for apologies that would perfectly explain everything. I stopped hoping for a moment where they would suddenly understand the depth of what they had done. Understanding isn't always necessary for peace. What mattered was that I understood myself. Ryan and I eventually reached something like balance. Not closeness, not distance, just honesty. He admitted that being chosen had become a burden. That carrying the family's expectations had pushed him into decisions he wasn't ready for. They didn't see me, he said once. They saw what I could provide. That sentence sounded painfully familiar. In a way, we were both casualties of the same mistake, being valued more for potential than for presence. The difference was I had learned how to walk away from it. The last time we all gathered together, nothing dramatic happened. No arguments, no emotional speeches. Just a quiet meal, polite conversation and unspoken understanding. As I left, my mother hugged me longer than usual. "Wherever you go," she said softly, "remember that you have a home here." I smiled, and for the first time it didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like an option. That's when I knew I was free. Freedom isn't cutting people off. Freedom is knowing you could return, and choosing not to. They wanted me back because I had become stable, dependable, safe. But I didn't build my life to be someone else's safety net. I built it to be my own. And in doing so, I taught them a lesson they never expected. You don't lose people when they leave. You lose them when you make them feel replaceable. They chose my rich cousin over me once. Now they understand the cost of that choice, and I carry no bitterness. Only the quiet confidence of someone who learned their worth the hard way and never forgot it again.